Hey, what's up everybody, Lawler here, your inside source for all things Rocket League. We've got a bit of an update when it comes to the Barrage Esports situation and why Oaly was benched. But before we get into that, as always, if you enjoy the content, make sure you guys give the video a thumbs up, as well as making sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you have any additional questions, comments, or concerns, make sure you drop those down below and I'll do my best to get back to those in a timely fashion. With that said, let's dive into what exactly went down. So if you guys didn't see the video I put out on Sunday, there was a tweet that came out from Barrage talking about how one of their players during the RLCS was going to be benched due to, quote, recent actions that fall below those standards, and that Oaly would be benched effective immediately. They then had a follow-up tweet stating that they will aim to provide more transparency, and that transparency is finally here. If you guys didn't see the results, which the recap should be out tomorrow, the team ended up going 0-3, didn't have great performances. There was some drama that went around it. And a lot of the reasons why we had that expectation of them performing well is because of what they've done in the previous regionals as well. Oaly obviously having big part in their success. So with him not being on the roster, you can see how much one player difference can make an effect on a team. The fact that you plug and play one player can completely change the spirits of the team, change the mentalities, but also change the play style. And sometimes it's just that new energy that comes in that can really, that can really elevate a team, but can also be their demise as well. So this ended up coming out and said just prior to the beginning of the RLCS major this past weekend, they made a public announcement on the decision to bench Oaly due to unprofessional conduct. Today, they would like to provide some context and transparency on what led to this decision. Now, normally organizations don't really do this. They end up saying that this thing is happening and they've only put out the tweet that you see here, and that's it. They never really put out a follow-up as to why things happened. And I think they're starting to do this to try and control the narrative. Obviously, they want to make sure that they say what is happening behind the scenes rather than allowing the public to speculate and try to come up with their own ideas. So I do feel in situations like this, I think it's a really good statement, especially from a smaller organization and a newer organization, to kind of put their foot down and say, hey, this is stuff we won't stand for, and these are the reasons. What they ended up saying is that these are the following reasons as to why they decided to bench Oaly. Number one, publicly slandering other players in the organization, which was detrimental to the team environment. If you are talking poorly about your own teammates, very unlikely that you're going to be set up for success. There's going to be animosity, a lot of frustrations. This is where things like a coach really come in handy. If Oaly is upset with his teammates, he should go to a coach or a manager and state, these are my frustrations, this is why I'm unhappy. The coach should digest that information and then handle them in a positive manner, have an open dialogue and an open conversation with the player that is essentially being talked poorly about, and try to figure out what the reasons are and come up with a solution with that player rather than just, hey, I think you suck, you're the worst, we're losing, it's your fault. Is more like, hey, what things do you think we should work on this week? Do you think we should improve here, here, here? What things are you working towards? Cool, I think those are good ideas. I could also see this being a benefit for you as well. Let's try to push forward in this way. It's going to come off a lot better. It's going to keep the animosity out of the teammates. And hopefully, once you start to see improvement from that player that you're upset with, that animosity goes away and you can continue to progress as a team. Again, a lot of coaches and managers are essentially, for lack of a better phrase, babysitting. There's a lot of internal conflict. They're very young kids. They're going through some changes in their bodies, and a lot of that has to do with the way they act or the way that they handle things, because they can't really see the big picture or get over the initial stuff. Obviously, that is a generalization. There's very mature younger kids in this scene as well. But again, not saying that Oaly is not one of them, but attacking your teammates is obviously not indicative of a good process for success. The next thing was sharing replays from private scrims publicly. Scrims are something that I'm kind of indifferent about. If they were meant to be kept private, obviously you don't want to share that because they can leak information or strategies that you're working on. A lot of teams accidentally leave their stuff turned on in Baka's mod and it ends up getting uploaded automatically anyway. A lot of times this ends up leaking a lot of information about teams before roster changes end up happening as well. Too many times do players want to save every single replay for future purposes, and it ends up going out to the public on ballchasing.gg, and you can see like, well, this team is playing against this other pro team, but this one player is different. This one player isn't their normal starting roster. It's someone else. Is this a tryout? Is this a roster change? And that's kind of how that speculation starts. Third one is trialing with other teams and players without the organization's permission or knowledge. This one's just a big no-no, and unfortunately it happens pretty often. and most of the time the organizations actually don't find out about it. But when they do, there's two ways they can think about it. They can either A, punish said player and then make them want to leave even more, which sucks because the organizations are not in charge of the spots when it comes to the RLCS. It is up to the players. And that's kind of the difficult that these orgs kind of have to teeter with, is either we punish this player, he leaves, we lose a star player, and he kind of gets what he wants and gets to leave the team, and then we're left trying to fulfill that spot, or we put up with it and then he leaves us like, it's a really weird dynamic that orgs kind of have to balance of, do we punish this player because they did something that is super bad and we force them to live with the consequences? Case in point, if this player is going and looking for other organizations, he obviously wants to leave us. He breached his contract. We can put him on a no pay. We can make him sit and he has to fulfill the rest of his contract, and we're not going to allow him to go play for anybody else competitively. We can withhold him to go play in the RLCS, and there's nothing he can do because he signed the dotted line. That is something that these orgs can do. I've talked to orgs in the past and said most of the times it's not worth the headache. You're better off trying to fulfill that spot and put your efforts elsewhere. But again, I do credit Barrage for kind of sticking to their guns and saying this is something we will not stand for, and I personally am all for it. Again, some players need to understand that when you sign a legally binding contract, you have to adhere to it. If you don't, they can go after you and sue you and do legality things that you just don't want to be a part of. This is a serious thing. You are signing a contract to get paid a salary to fulfill the requirements that are on said salary, and when you breach that, they can have some major repercussions. And more importantly, if you're trying to go to a different team in the future, a lot of organizations are going to see this and be like, I don't want to touch this person. And it's not really worth that extra 3-4 months for throwing away your entire career. The next part is disclosing parts of confidential agreements and or contract details with third parties. Again, this is an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. You are not allowed to sign these agreements and share that information to other parties. The reason why is it kind of gets rid of the integrity of, I can understand both sides of this. If he's trying to get a better deal or trying to figure out where he as a player should stand when it comes to salaries or what it may be. Again, this is just kind of generalizations. These aren't the specifics of what's being discussed, I assume, in these conversations, but things that should be in consideration is if I'm a player and I'm trying to find a team because I'm not happy, whether it be for pay or my teammates or performance or whatever it may be, I'm going to ask around to other players that I think I'm qualified or on the same level of and be like, well, how much are you getting paid? Because honestly, that's what I think I should be getting paid. That's what I'm going to go into negotiations for. But because you sign a contract and you sign an NDA, technically you're not supposed to be sharing that information. So again, dealing with that makes it difficult for the organizations, and they choose to punish him for it because ultimately it gives away the leverage. This is kind of a classic act of business versus player kind of situation. And depending on what side of the fence you sit on, it's entirely up to you. But again, both parties are trying to keep their best interests in mind. So I understand. Whether I agree with it or not is besides the point. The last one is failure to communicate with staffs and players in lead up to the major. This could be a multitude of things. Obviously, they're not going to give too much of the details. This could be anywhere from the player just deciding because he's trying to look for a new team, he's no longer going to show up to practice. He's not going to communicate on his prior obligations, whatever they may be. Again, we don't know any of that information, and rightfully so. They're going to withhold a lot of this. They do have kind of an ending statement that I think is really important. And Barrage ends up saying, we understand that he is a young player and this is the first time he's been signed to an organization. We therefore gave him the opportunity to rectify the issues during a call on the 15th of October, ensuring you understand the problems and advising him on how to resolve this situation. He made the decision to discuss this with parties outside the organization and initially made no attempt to resolve any of the issues or respond to management staff in the build-up to the major. Since the major, he has reached out to discuss the situation and apologized for his behavior. Again, this is me just speculating. I don't know. It felt like almost as if he thought he could get away with it. And they're like, no, you signed here and these are the things that you're responsible for. So either you do this or we're going to punish you. And then he's like, well, shoot, you're right. And then ended up kind of double backing on it. Again, that's just the way that it looks. Whether that's the case or not, I don't know. They then state that the decision to bench him was not one they took lightly. However, given the circumstances, we did so in order to maintain the best possible team environment for the major. We understand that by doing this, our performance would be affected and ultimately our placement. So again, this is a difficult situation for the organization. Your player acts out, does whatever they do. Do you allow them to get away with it and basically show that it's okay for the other team members and give this unfair bias because without him you underperform? Or do you take the hit, set a precedent, which allows you to do better further on? I personally think Barrage did a superb job of handling this. Both from the actions that they have to take to not only protect their situation and set a precedent within their organization that they won't put up with this, but at the same time, even though they're taking a hit, it is much better to set this precedent and take a hit early on rather than be further in the season and try to have some of these younger guys walk over them because they do have the rights to the spots. It does sound like they are going to try to continue to work with him despite this circumstance. They understand that he is very talented as a player and has a lot of potential, and they say, we hope he will work with us to continue to develop him both in and out of the game. They then talk about how further details will end up coming out in the next few days regarding their situation for the winter split of the RLCS this season. Shortly after her post, Oaly ended up actually replying to this message from the organization, ended up saying, "I'd like to apologize for my immature behavior to my teammates and the organization. This has taught me that how I behaved is simply not acceptable, and I will be more mature in the future. I'm sorry to anyone who rooted for me, who have disappointed with this behavior. I'm sorry." But as kind of final thoughts, this is something that a lot of organizations have to deal with. There is a lot of young kids that don't understand the severity of what's going on, and I hope this is educational to a lot of you that are watching, that these are things that you need to consider, especially when you are a younger player. Again, depending on what country you're in, there's labor laws and stuff that you have to follow, and you have to have a legal guardian kind of co-sign these situations. But again, it never hurts to ask for help, whether it be community figures or asking your parents or getting a lawyer. Things like this should be taken extremely serious. And you are starting to see some transitions in the actual esports realm. Most contracts in traditional sports are made public. You get to know how much they're making, what it entails, what the obligations are for how many years, all that kind of stuff. And right now, esports doesn't really do that. I hope that we do see that transition in the future. In the Counter-Strike team for Cloud9, they made their contracts public. Everybody was able to go see what the details entail. And I hope this is a trend that we end up seeing in the future, where contracts and everything else are made open to the public, and you can see how valuable something is, and it gets rid of a lot of this stuff that happens behind the scenes. And not only are we as the general public able to kind of get more invested about the actual stuff that's going down in the specifics of the contract, but it also makes it even better for everybody else that is being represented. Whether you're a player, whether you're an organization, that transparency goes a long way, and I think it earns a lot of trust in the public eye as well. So again, I'm curious on what you guys' thoughts, whether this was handled correctly or not, how you feel on what side of the fence you are. Let me know in the comments down below, but that is going to wrap it up for me today, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace.